Let's talk about Mulan, which, as we've mentioned already, is the remake of the 1998 animated film the same name. It's one of many films based or adapted around the Ballad of Mulan, which is a Chinese folklore tale. And this film stars Liu Yifei, who's a pretty big name in China. A lot of people know her over there. And there's also a bunch of actors in here that Western audiences are pretty familiar with at this point, particularly Donnie Yen, who plays a commander character who's kind of a commander mentor instead of like love interests that we get in the animated one. We have Zi Ma, who plays the father of Mulan. We have Jason Scott Lee as the main villain, or, well, the one who's supposed to be the main villain, but we'll get to that. Gong Li, who's the actual like interesting antagonist. Yusan An, who's kind of like a rival slash maybe love interest, and Jet Li, who plays the Emperor. And boy, do they rewrite the Emperor character to accommodate, that's for sure. But this film is directed by New Zealand director Nikki Caro, which makes sense if you look at her filmography, particularly Whale Rider, which definitely very similar to the story of Mulan in some ways. And a lot of screenwriters for this, as you can imagine. This is a Disney live action remake. They tend to have a bunch of people writing. And yeah, I'm very curious what you all thought of this compared to the original. I'll start off and say, it's the same plot. I said in my review, it's conceptually identical. You have a young woman who wants to fight in a war in the place of her father, who is an aging war veteran, so that he won't die. And she wants to bring honor to her family. The big twist on this film is that she's actually a gifted martial artist from the get-go. She has this special thing called Qi, which is kind of like the inspiration behind what the Force is. So that's probably why some people will watch this and recognize some of the terminology. It's because Qi is kind of what George Lucas drew inspiration from when he imagined what the Force was in his Star Wars films. But Qi essentially, it's explained pretty well in Avatar: The Last Airbender, actually. The idea that it's like this energy that flows through you, and everybody has it, but some people are more gifted with it. They're able to cultivate it, and it's something more special.
It means air, right, in Chinese?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, okay, just making sure.
It has to do with things like chakras and all that. So the idea behind Mulan in this case is that she's pretty strong. She's a warrior, but this movie instead focuses more on the oppressive gender discrimination she has to face. She can't just share her gifts. She has to hold them back because the world is kind of shutting her down. And that's like the main story. That's kind of what we're getting out of this movie. We're watching a young woman try to figure out, well, I could lie about who I really am, and that'll only get me so far. And the big thing with this film is that it draws a lot of inspiration from wuxia, which is just a genre of Chinese martial arts. And there's lots of incredible wuxia films in the 21st century. This film's kind of drawing from a lot of them, specifically like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragons. You have a lot of special effects, a lot of wiring tricks, a lot of incredible cinematography, just trying to showcase this like Qi thing, making Mulan a bit of like a superhero almost. So while the original animated version was kind of like a musical comedy adventure, this is more of like a fantasy epic. It's like a war movie. It's got all kinds of incredible action sequences. And that's kind of what they decided to do with the remake, which is interesting because that is pretty different from the animated version. We say all the time when we review these remakes, most recently, I guess, would be like Lion King and Aladdin and Dumbo and Beauty and the Beast. Sometimes they're very different. Like Dumbo is pretty different. Aladdin kind of in between. But, Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, it's just live action versions of what we've seen before. They don't really change that much in any interesting way. Mulan, it's changing a lot, or it's changing a lot of important things and highlighting things that the animated didn't really focus on, like the action and all of that. Of course, it's still Disney. It's not that violent, and there's definitely no blood or anything like that. But this is what we got. And the responses so far have been pretty divided. And I want to start with you, Abby, for our first official review with you as our co-host. What did you think of the live action Mulan? Did it make a fan out of you?
It's a good pun. I like that. It made kind of a fan out of me. I feel like I had a mixed to fairly positive feeling about the film when I watched it. And reading other people's reactions to it in the days that followed, I felt strangely, like I kind of agreed with all of them in some way or another. The one that I thought was the most interesting was Alison Willmore's review for Vulture, where she mentioned that in a way the live action Mulan is being made to kind of appeal more to Chinese audiences, or at least what Disney thinks Chinese audiences want, more importantly. And the result is that it ended up being kind of a more buttoned up and dour version of that story, and maybe not a full success in that regard. I think that there are some parts that I really like. I like the interaction between Mulan and Gong Li's character. That's an interesting play on the Falcon character from the animated film. I like how they expanded that and kind of turn her into a more full-fledged character in her own right, and kind of a counterpoint regarding the need the cultural edict to kind of hide your gift away as a woman, which I think applies in a more timely fashion to right now, in addition to the culture of the film, obviously. I think that was an interesting relationship. I don't know that it really fully paid off in the end. But the thing that I missed the most were the songs. There are no songs, or at least no musical numbers in the new film, but there are a lot of musical nods to the original songs in the film. And while I appreciated, there were a couple of moments that I think kind of repurpose some musical themes from the original film in ways that I thought were kind of powerful. But mostly when you hear that, what you wish you were experiencing were the actual musical numbers, because they're so much fun and the songs are so well written. So like with a lot of the Disney remakes, I think what happens most often when you're watching this is that you're interested by some of the things that are new, but mostly you're just reminded of how good the thing is that also exists. So it kind of cancels itself out for me a little bit.
Yeah, it's fun. I think we're pretty aligned on a lot of this, I think. I had that same feeling where while I was watching the movie, I was like, you know what, this is working on me. Like, this is effective stuff. And I wasn't like over the moon. There was at one point where I thought this film was going to be great, but then it did something that I didn't see coming necessarily. And I was like, oh, this is great, because it's not just that this character is really gifted. The film is taking her in a totally new direction from the animated one, which happens like in the middle of the movie. And I was like, this is what I want to see. I want to see something different. But then it kind of doesn't take it in a different direction. It's kind of like a red herring almost. So I ended up being like, oh, well, okay, this is just okay, I guess. But yeah, we have a lot to talk about. But Will, I know you haven't been the biggest fan of a lot of these Disney live action remakes. So how does this one land for you?
I mean, to be fair, I mean, I haven't dismissed all of them. I think I was fairly favorable on Dumbo, and I liked the Cinderella, Kenneth Branagh one, and Pete's Dragon, if that counts. But yeah, I mean, as far as the newest ones like Aladdin and The Lion King, and then a few years back Beauty and the Beast, those ones just represent what I don't like about the studio's new regimen, which is just basically like heating up the microwave with or heating up your leftovers in the microwave and just hoping that you don't mind that it's basically the same thing you had before, but slightly worse. And for me, yeah, it's just a little drier. It's not quite as flavorful, not quite as colorful.
Where's the color?
Yeah. But as far as this one, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think this one, like they're pretty good about, stepping away from doing the same movie over again. I think the cast is really solid. It is very refreshing to see a primarily Chinese cast in a major Hollywood blockbuster. And I think, that's great for a lot of reasons. And I think if I had the chance to see this on the big screen, seeing a big martial arts movie, a multi-million-dollar, $100+ million martial arts movie in theaters, I think that might have helped me move away from some of my criticisms, perhaps. But I just ultimately found that the movie itself, while certainly not as tedious as like Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin were, and certainly not as just like cynical and empty as I found Lion King to be, I just ultimately just didn't fully connect with this one, because it felt like it did have a bit of like an identity crisis, where I think the middle segment, like you guys are talking about, where it is kind of its own thing. It's a little bit more subdued. It's trying to be a little bit more like even mature at times than the original Disney animated film. I think those segments stood out to me, and that was where I was kind of jiving with the film, and I was like, okay, I can see where this is going. I kind of appreciate this. I'm digging this. And then I just found the rest of it either towards the beginning and then towards the end to be just not very eventful. It just felt like, I mean, like the action's fine. Like it's not bad, but I found it to be very editing heavy. It didn't really like give the choreography a chance to stand out in a way that I felt like you were able to separate this from several other martial arts movies from China and otherwise. But I just found the acting itself to be like kind of serviceable. Like I think our lead here is really strong as an action presence. I think as a dramatic presence, she didn't really do much for me. She kind of felt a bit one note throughout the film. And as much as I love seeing Donnie Yen and Jet Li and stuff, it felt like they didn't really have much to do here. Unfortunately, Jet Li just sits down or gets held hostage throughout the whole thing. It's like, you're going to hire Jet Li, like have him like kick somebody in the face or something. Like
he has 3.5 seconds of kicking around. So
I guess, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, it's the same like with the Expendables and Forbidden Kingdom. It's just like Hollywood just never really does enough with Jet Li, in my opinion. But that's a whole.
I agree with that.
Yeah, but as far as the movie itself, like I don't hate it. Like I didn't feel disdain like I did for The Lion King, and I wasn't like aggressively bored as I was for Aladdin. I just felt like there was potential here. Sometimes it lived up to it. For the most part, it just left me a bit wanting, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I think all three of us are probably like, you know, it's a range, I guess. There's a bit of a spectrum here, but it sounds like kind of what Abby was saying. It's like you agree with the negative stuff. It just depends on how much that like hampers your overall take. And it sounds like we have like the same criticisms to an extent, but I guess like for me, I appreciated some of the good stuff enough that I definitely like this a little bit more than some people maybe. But I've seen this movie twice now. I'd say that it improves on the second watch in a lot of ways, but then it also reveals more of what you don't like. So it just continues that like mixed feeling you might have. And it's funny because, you know, I watched this with I watched this by myself the first time. The second time I watched it with my partner and her family. And, you know, I asked them before we started watching, I was like, well, so you like the original animated one? And they were all like, yeah, like they really like it. Like one of them was like, one of the sisters, she was like, I love it. Like could quote the whole movie basically. So, okay, we went into it and they were just kind of like, they were picking holes in this thing. It was like I was watching it with CinemaSins. It was awesome. But they were like, kind of like, oh, her hair is down. Like, but that doesn't make any sense. And it's like, what? She's being a little jerk when she's like a kid or whatever. And they were kind of just like, I don't know, they couldn't get engrossed in it. Maybe that's because they weren't watching it in a theater, and that kind of hampers like your ability to do that. But what was most telling to me is like after the movie, like they didn't hate it. They were like, oh, you know, it's fine. You know, one of them was like really not into it, and then the other two were like, it was okay. But then we ended up watching like clips from the original right after, because they were like, let's watch the animated one. Let's get into that right now. And we did. We watched like our favorite moments from the animated one on like a laptop because it's Disney Plus. It's right there. And that was more fun. You know, it was more enjoyable because the animated one just is pretty lasting. It has really great music. I've said for a long time that I think, you know, the animated Mulan is one of my personal favorite Disney animated films. And I just, even though it's not the best at anything, like it doesn't have the best humor, doesn't have the best action or characters or anything, there's something just really rewatchable about it. It is still pretty funny and it still looks really good. And I don't know, it's like comfort food Disney in a really good way. And I always find myself wanting to rewatch it. And two songs from it, I think, are some of Disney's best, Reflection and I'll Make a Man Out of You. But, you know, Abby, so you mentioned, you know, they don't have the songs in here, but they quote the lyrics a few times in the dialogue, you know, and that was like a fun little nod of like, all right, this is definitely a remake. Like they're taking the lyrics from the songs and kind of like putting them in there, sort of like maybe not shoehorning, but adding them in. What did you think of the nostalgia though? Were you feeling nostalgic for the original? You kind of mentioned it reminded you of the old thing, but how do you think that they balanced it overall? Do you think they were able to keep you from wanting to rewatch the original right after?
They weren't able to keep me from wanting to rewatch the original right after, just because I have a lot of fondness for the original movie. Like you said, the songs are really strong, but also I think one of the things that makes that movie stand out for me is that I think there are some really interesting visual moments from that that animated film, like the shot of the Hun army coming down the mountain and the avalanche right after are really impressive pieces of animation. And some of those, obviously, those moments get replayed in a live action sense in the remake. But I feel like in this particular climate where we are so often seeing action set pieces like that, and they often happen mostly within a computer anyway, I feel like the effect kind of gets lost because you're not really experiencing something that has some of the same limitations that, say, animation does, where that happens and you're just kind of bowled over that somebody could actually do that. I do think that there are some moments, like I really appreciated during the training sequence. I think they Harry Gregson Williams, the composer, inserts some bits of reflection into the points where she's starting to, where Mulan is starting to recognize her own strength and that she can actually live into that fully in her current situation, and you start to see her thrive. That I found kind of touching because it takes that moment, and where in the animated movie it's more of a group thing, like everybody's getting better. It takes it and it focuses it specifically on her own development, which I think is different and I think kind of empowering from a feminist angle, which I think this movie does try to do.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned the way that the live action does or doesn't sort of like build on the most iconic scenes. Like I didn't mention this, but when we were watching it as a group, the scene that was most disappointing was when she's putting on the armor for the first time, because she doesn't put on the armor and she doesn't do all of the like cutting of the hair. And it was less about like the details of that. It was more of like making a moment out of that scene. And the animated one is so emotional. And it's so like, it just makes you swell up of like, she's doing this for her father and it's so epic. And then, but in the live action, it's pretty rushed and it's a longer movie even though, and I don't know, they don't really make much of it. It just sort of like skips ahead to her riding out and like, you don't see her put on the armor. She just already has it on. And I don't know, there was something kind of lost about that. And then I'd also say that, yeah, I think, Will, you mentioned the middle part. I kind of felt like this movie's like Wonder Woman moment where you were able to watch this character finally like be unleashed. And it was really cool to see. But I think like it ties into like my main issue with this movie is that I just don't think that its message is all that compelling. I think the idea here is that, our character is really special and strong, but her big problem is that she has to lie about it, which is kind of interesting, I guess. But like, I don't know, it isn't as interesting to me as like I feel like kids watching this don't have an issue with sharing themselves. Like I feel like this current generation watching this movie is like, I know I'm great. I'm on social media all the time. I broadcast myself everywhere. And so to me, it was kind of lost of like what this character was going through. I just don't know if it's going to resonate with a lot of people. I think the gender discrimination thing is obviously the right angle to go with here, but I don't know, I guess they just didn't execute it in a way that I thought is going to last or be as effective as the original, because the original kind of shows like more of the struggle and it's a different take on it for a different generation. And I think it's smart that they updated it. I just think they updated it in a way that feels more of like what they think people want instead of something that they think people should respond to. Like Disney usually has really surprising takeaways in their movies. They're able to, put in things that people won't see coming. So, all right, let's get into our final thoughts and grades on Mulan. Starting with you, Abby. It sounds like we're probably pretty close. It sounds like, yeah, just kind of mixed to fairly positive. But what's your grade for this, and any final thought?
I would give this maybe a C plus. There are some parts of it that I think are interesting. Were it not for the existence of a original movie that a lot of people, myself included, really enjoy, I think it could potentially stand on its own as a pretty decent film. But yeah, I think as it is, it's just mostly okay, kind of undercuts itself, but ends up fine. So yeah, solid middle of the road for me.
All right. And Will Ashton.
Yeah, I think C plus is about where I am as well. I mean, I was looking forward to this one a little bit more than your average Disney live action remake because it felt like there was some more potential here to do something interesting, unique, and to some extent, I think the movie lives up to that. In addition to stuff we were talking about before, I think the cinematography is really sharp. I mean, I do like the production design, and I think some of the performances, like I apologize if I butchered the name, but Thais Ma,
Zima.
Zima, who plays Mulan's father. As always, I thought he was great. And, you know, another film from 2020 where I felt like he was one of the strongest aspects in an otherwise kind of ho-hum film, which is a shame because I think he's a tremendous actor. But in any case, yeah, I think the movie itself, you know, I wasn't mad I saw it like some of the other ones. Like, it didn't feel like it was objectively like wasting my time. It didn't feel like it was just like retracing the steps. I do think they were trying to do something a little bit more unique and something that would at least justify having a remake for this. But I just think the execution itself is ultimately kind of clumsy. And I just don't think they stuck the landing particularly well, which is a shame because the moments that do work, I think do showcase a film that would, I think, be a pretty interesting step for these live action remakes. But alas, as it is, it's a pretty mixed bag.
Yeah, I'm struggling. I can't decide if I'm C plus or B minus. I'm trying to remember what I liked, and trying to be as positive as I can. And yeah, it's just the more I think about some good stuff in this movie, the more I'm like, yeah, well, but this other thing. And yeah, I have a feeling that this movie isn't going to really last the test of time. I don't think a lot of kids are going to watch it and prefer it over the animated. And, that's not the only barometer for success, obviously. And especially because it's kind of like you said, well, this is a step in the right direction. I'm glad that it's not like Lion King. And, there is something kind of interesting, as like Abby mentioned, the idea that they did make this to be very successful, not just here, but also for Chinese audiences. And that's kind of a business model. That's something that they see as the future of movies that can be huge hits both here and in China. And as a result, it does feel like it was made by a committee instead of by, a filmmaker who is really putting their stamp on this material. I don't think we really get that. So unfortunately, because of that, and because I think, for every good performance I can name out here with Zima, you also have him just sort of like spouting like really obvious stuff at the very ending that's pretty cringeworthy, which I guess I won't give away. But
the dialogue in general is not great.
It's very stilted. And yeah. It's a shame because there's so much good here. There's, like Will said, a lot of potential, but yeah, there's just none of that Disney magic that I think a lot of us were hoping for. So I guess I'll have to say it's a pretty high C plus. It's not your typical C plus of like, probably don't recommend it to most people. I think worth checking out if you have a Disney Plus subscription, but not for $30. Definitely when it comes out December and you're interested in seeing it, that's a pretty safe bet that you'll at least enjoy it with your family around then. So that's Mulan.